everybody. I want to welcome everybody who's watching this to the first episode of what I'm calling Coffee Break. It's kind of a coffee break with the pastor. Um, Pretty much, this is just a little teaching series, conversation, really, more than teaching series. I like having conversations. And the things we'll be discussing throughout this little series while we're going through this pandemic are the things that I enjoy talking about over, you guessed it, cup of coffee. I said cup of coffee. I think I need more coffee. All right. And so yeah, that was kind of the motive behind it. It was so we'll talk things about like theology and history, kind of current events, things like that, and just the things I really enjoy talking about that I would typically like to have a cup of coffee over. Long term, I kind of hope that this grows into something where somebody will come alongside me and you guys will actually get to witness a conversation taking place and not just me talking to you through the camera. And so that's the gist behind it. Now, today's coffee that I'm drinking comes from a local roaster, and they are called Parable Coffee. This is these guys have made the best cup of coffee I've had in the state of South Dakota. It is family owned and operated. It's almost pretty much one guy. I think him and his family do it. It is a company that is proud of their Christian faith, and they make that known on their website. And so I'm very glad to be drinking their coffee. Now, if you're like me and you don't corrupt coffee with cream like sin corrupts mankind, then you're gonna want the smoothest and freshest cup of coffee you can get, because we're not trying to cover up all the bad taste with cream and sugar. And so if you enjoy drinking your coffee black and not corrupting it with anything, this is the coffee for you. It's wonderful. And come join me on the conversation, and you'll find out just how good this coffee is. I am not getting paid in any way to kind of give a shout out to this company, Parable Coffee. But I think their coffee's that good, and they have no idea that I'm doing this at all as well. But they got great coffee, and it's local, so you're supporting a local business. All right, today I want to talk about the sovereignty of God. The sovereignty of God is something I talk about quite a bit, and there's a reason for that. And some people, if you've been watching our videos long enough or been sitting in our sermons quite a bit, you may have wondered why Pastor Brandon is always talking about the sovereignty of God. I've actually said from the pulpit that it is something that needs to come back into our language and into our faith and into our practice. Because I think it has gotten so far away, which is the reason why I talk about it so much. There are two absolute truths. Two absolute truths. And it's important for you all to remember these two absolute truths. One, God is sovereign. That is not up for debate. God is sovereign. Two, man is responsible. So God is sovereign and man is responsible for their actions. And a lot of people have a hard time trying to figure out how to comprehend those two truths. Now, those are absolute two truths that run parallel to each other. And so, when you struggle to put those two things together, you tend to pick one over the other. Well, there's a reason why I have to speak on the sovereignty of God more than the responsibility of man, and that is because we already have a huge focus on the responsibility of man. It's actually dominant in our culture, and the moment I speak about the sovereignty of God, the common response that comes back is, yeah, but. And the moment you add that, yeah, but, you are actually finding a way to rob God of his sovereignty and of his glory. And what I'm trying to do is bring this proper balance, so we're not saying yeah but we can affirm the two truths together, that God is sovereign and man is responsible. Now, for this conversation, I have no intentions on teaching how those two truths come together, and I have no intention of focusing on man's responsibility. And so, when you look at our culture, when you take a look around, man's responsibility is already up on a much higher pedestal than God's sovereignty, and that is sad. That is absolutely sad. And so you walk into any Christian bookstore, I don't care which Christian bookstore it is, you walk into any Christian bookstore, there are going to be more published books on the responsibility of man over the sovereignty of God. I mean, 10 to 1 at least. It's some Christian bookstores are not going to have any books on the sovereignty of God whatsoever. And so it's completely outnumbered. They're non-existent in certain stores. And so the responsibility, man, you'll get books like, like prayer circles, do these little prayer circles, 7 steps to so and so and whatever. Your entire Christian living section is pretty much telling you how to apply things in your life. And it's this constant focus on the responsibility of man. And it has been in our culture for so long that I don't think we really comprehend the sovereignty of God. And when someone does come along and go, "Hey, God is sovereign," people are upset. They get upset right away. And so that's the reason why I have such a strong emphasis, because not only do we live in a day where the responsibility of man is up on a much higher pedestal than the sovereignty of God, but this area is pretty thick with that as well, the responsibility of man, and that's just my observation of the area, that there's if somebody does believe in the sovereignty of God, it's a real hush-hush thing. If somebody really does affirm the sovereignty of God, it's not on the forefront of their preaching. And it should be, because that should be our starting point for all things. And so if somebody does believe that, typically, and this is not true of everyone, but typically it's not on the forefront. And so now, if I was in a different area where it was all hyper-Calvinism, and the responsibility of man was neglected, then I got to focus in on the responsibility of man. They've already have this improper balance of the sovereignty of God and the responsibility of man. Now, the sovereignty of God is always going to be higher than the responsibility of man, simply because of the creator and the creature. But when it comes to our balancing in the truths and in the teaching, there has to be a proper balance. And typically areas don't have that proper balance. And so it is up to the minister, it is up to the one who leads in the proclamation of God's word, edifying the saints, to bring that proper balance. And so people have to really get used to this notion of the sovereignty of God, that he is in control and he will have his way. And then once that is fully grasped, we can kind of bring the two together and show how this is a parallel thing. It's not two forces working against each other. But in the meantime, while we are so adamant about our responsibility, what we have to do, how much we have to put into it, the focus is the sovereignty of God. We have to learn that God is in control, that he is on his throne, that Jesus is in fact the Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Now, when we say those words, do we actually mean them? And that's really what's behind all this. We like saying Jesus is Lord of Lords and King of Kings, but is he truly Lord to you? Is he really, in your theology, is Jesus really reigning supreme right now? Or do you kind of call the shots? Or something else in your life really reigning supreme? And so, what happens when the sovereignty of God is neglected? I want to read a section out of this book, two sections out of this book to you guys. And this book is about the sovereignty of God. And this person was spot on, absolutely spot on. And it sounds like well, let me just read it to you, and you guys listen very carefully. I'm going to read two sections to you guys. So here's the first section. And it says this: after 19 centuries of gospel preaching, Christ is still despised and rejected of men. Ooh. Worse still, he, the Christ of Scripture, is proclaimed and magnified by very few. In the majority of modern pulpits, he is dishonored and disowned. Despite frantic efforts to attract the crowds, the majority of the churches are being emptied rather than filled. And what of the great masses of non-churchgoers? In the light of Scripture, we are compelled to believe that the many are on the broad road that leadeth to destruction, and that the few are on the narrow way that leadeth unto life. Many are declaring that Christianity is a failure, and despair is settling on many faces. Not a few of the Lord's own people are bewildered, and their faith is being severely tried. And what of God? Does he see and hear? Is he impotent or indifferent? A number of those who are regarded as leaders of Christian thought told us that God would not prevent the coming of the late awful war, and that he was unable to bring about the termination. It was said, and said openly, that conditions were beyond God's control. Do these things look as though God were ruling the world? And so he asked this question. He says that after 19 centuries of gospel preaching, Christ is rejected because they're not focusing in on the truth of God's sovereignty. Is really what his point is that this is how they dishonor. And even though they're finding ways to bring the massive crowds in, the churches they're exiting, and we've been seeing that steady decline for quite some time. Talked about that this war that was taking place during this time, that it was beyond God's control, and that if the war was to end, it was completely beyond God's control. He was unable to bring about its termination, and he was unable to prevent the coming war. And so that was one section, and it really sounds a lot like what we're living in now, and in this midst of a pandemic that is taking place. Is this beyond God's control? And a lot of Christians are saying, no, it's not. But I'm sure there's a lot of people who are, especially those people who do not want to acknowledge that, hey, God is in control right now. And they don't want to say, like, well, what's the purpose of this pandemic? I don't know the purpose of this pandemic, of this specific virus, but it has a purpose. It's not up to us to have the answers to everything, but we need to know that there's nothing without purpose. And that's the point of sovereignty of God. There is nothing or no one without purpose. Another section. Without a doubt, a world crisis is at hand, and everywhere men are alarmed. But God is not. He is never taken by surprise. It is no unexpected emergency which now confronts him. For he is the one who worketh all things after the counsel of his own will. Ephesians 1:2. Hence, though the world is panic-stricken, the word to the believer is, fear not. All things are subject to his immediate control. All things are moving in accord with his eternal purpose, and therefore all things are working together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. It must be so, for of him and through him and to him are all things. Romans 11 verse 36. Yet how little is this realized today, even by the people of God? Many suppose that he is a little more than a far distant spectator, taking no immediate hand in the affairs of earth. It is true that man has a will, but so also has God. It is true that man is endowed with power, but God is all-powerful. It is true that, speaking generally, the material world is regulated by law, but behind that law is the law giver and law administrator. Man is but the creature, God is the creator, and endless ages before man first saw the light, the mighty God existed. The heir of the world was founded, made his plans, and being infinite in power, and man only finite, his purpose and plan cannot be withstood or thwarted by the creatures of his own hands. In other words, you are not going to disrupt God's plans. You are the creature. You are not going to derail the creator and what he wants to do, because he is in fact the creator. We're too busy bringing God to our level. But look at how that paragraph opened up. Without a doubt, a world in crisis is at hand, and every man is alarmed, but God is not alarmed. He is never taken by surprise. This is not some unexpected event that he didn't see coming that we are going through right now. And while the rest of the world is so panic-stricken, God is not. And that's the point of the sovereignty of God. And that is the point for the believers, is to rest in the knowledge that God is in control of all things. And so the issue we have in our culture is we are too busy starting with ourselves and working our way to God. It's no wonder why we have things distorted. It is absolutely no wonder why we have things distorted, because we're too focused on starting with ourselves. We start with us. We need to be starting with God. God must be our beginning point of all things. We start with God and then work our way down to us. It's not we start with us and work our way up to God. We can't do things that way. And it's quite simple. It is quite simple. It is as simple as creator and creature. There's one who is above us. There's one who is in control. We are the creation. We are in submission even when we think we are not. And so, the encouragement for this video and this discussion is that we need to have an attitude like the two Johns that we find in Scripture. John the disciple and John the Baptist. What do the opening words of John's gospel begin with? It begins with, in the beginning was God. Right from the start, he begins with God. In the beginning was God. I'm not even going to begin this gospel message without telling you from the first hand that right from the start, this is God's story, this is God's plan, God is in control. In the beginning was God. It is about God. That should be our start. We should be beginning with God at all times. John the Baptist also provides us with an attitude we should mimic, and this is also in the Gospel of John. We can find this when some of the followers of John the Baptist were getting jealous of Jesus' ministry. John the Baptist goes into this teaching, and he says this. He says, "He must increase, and I must decrease." That's the point. That is the direction I'm trying to lead us to, is to be humble enough to acknowledge we are not masters of our own fate. We are not in control of these things. I don't have the type of control that I think I have. If you were to ask me 10 years ago, would I be in the spot? I would tell you no way, because it's out of my control. I would have never been able to have planned all this. And that's probably true of a lot of you. If I was to ask 10, 20, 30 years ago, would you picture yourself where you're at now? And chances are you're going to say, no way. Absolutely not. And so the focus has to be on God and not on ourselves or our works or our responsibilities. And it's my belief, when we realize that God is sovereign, our responsibilities and our work naturally flow the way they are supposed to. And so that is the reason why I have such a big focus on the sovereignty of God. And now you all know. It's not just because of the area or the culture we live in, that we live in a time where we're so hyper-focused on our responsibility and our application. But it's also because the scriptures are laid out that way. And the scriptures, if you're speeding on through the scriptures, you're not going to catch all the goodness that is within the pages of God's word. But a lot of times, there's the sovereignty of God working. For example, the woman at the well in John chapter 4, the words say Jesus had to pass through Samaria. He had to. And he was there at the exact time when the Samaritan woman was going to be at the well and ready to ask this Samaritan woman for a drink. That is divine timing. That is sovereignty. Even though the words don't say God is sovereign, so here's how it worked out. We see the sovereignty in the pages of Scripture. God's sovereignty is always there, and so that's the other reason why I have such an emphasis on the sovereignty of God. Because when you read the Word of God, His control is always there, and it's a wonderful thing. It's something to marvel at and rest. And so, and which is what the disciples did too, especially when Jesus calmed the storm. Again, sovereign over nature. When Jesus calmed the storm, they're like, who is this man? I mean, there was just such marvelment there. And so we are to marvel at that, at his sovereignty, but we're also to come and rest in that sovereignty. So in the midst of a virus that is out of our control, we need to go to God and trust his control and say, we don't know what's going on, who's going to catch us, what its end game is, but you are good, you are in control, and you're doing this for the good of all those who you have called and loved. And so that is the first episode of Coffee Break. Look forward to having more. And hey, if there's something you guys want to talk about, let me know. And if you guys want to get together sometime and come on camera, let me know that too. I would enjoy another voice in here, and it'd be a conversation and not this kind of thing. So, all right, everybody, God bless and have a great rest of your week.